Before we get to questions, I just wanted to mention two other points. And one is that now that we have all this big data, a lot of researchers are approaching their research differently. And instead of coming up with hypotheses, which they want to prove through going through a research project, they're just taking data and throwing it into some kind of software and coming out with conclusions from that data. So the whole process of science is really changing now. And we need to understand that as we move forward, continuing to publish the research. And then we get to the whole question of who is curating that data, who is making sure that it's sound data. And if people are taking all this big data, the assumption is that it's all good data, but it probably isn't. Besides making it interoperable, you have to make sure that it's really good data. So just two last thoughts. Any questions? No questions?
Yeah, lots of questions.
Oh, well, let's go.
Well, perhaps back to Jerry. I mean, he says this is going to cost us a lot of money. Or it's going to cost somebody more. But you didn't even kind of really venture a suggestion as to what business models publishers might be beyond using up some of those large society surpluses, which I guess will be doing us a service.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, we haven't really, at the IEEE, explored, the business models for these. Right now, and obviously we need to do that. Sitting here today and listening to Mackenzie, I'm thinking, well, maybe the opportunity is there that, okay, the data needs to be open, but then we develop these APIs and this great software around the access, and that's what we will, are able to charge for. So, I mean, that's one idea. I think we have to come up with some novel ideas to, finance that. Yeah, deep society reserves are another way, but they last only for so long. Especially, I actually had the pleasure of speaking at a National Academy's board on research data back in February. And the funny story was that the promise to me was that no one will ask you about open access. So I said, great, get a day off from open access today. So I talked about essentially what I spoke to you all this afternoon about, and the room was a mix of librarians and government people, and wouldn't you know, the first question was, what is IEEE's policy on open access? So I said, well, I danced around that, and I said, well, I can tell you this, though, that if we get into a fully open access world and our revenues plummet, we really won't be able to do anything, any of the things that I talked about with big data, because we're hoping to at least bootstrap that by, spending some of our surplus. So, yeah, it's a serious problem, Mark. It's, again, it's sort of like, akin to what I'm involved in my local municipal government, and we're always dealing with things like the state mandates certain things, the State Board of Education mandates certain things, and then leaves it to the municipalities to pay for it. And so the government, again, here is mandating something. The money has to come from somewhere. Maybe part of it comes from the government. I don't know. Do you have any ideas of your own?
Well, I was a bit surprised to see in your presentation that you seem to be even envisaging a role in preservation and what you refer to as data transformation and sometimes called migration, because that seems to be, a huge, be a kind of agenda step away from publishers' capabilities at this point, frankly. And the sense I have from talking to the community is that there seems to be something of a consensus emerging that data is best, research data is best held in subject disciplinary specific data repositories if possible, if they exist, or can be created because of specialist curation skills and so on, like EPI or whatever. If it can't be there, then in like an orphan data type repository like Riot or some sort of service like that, or possibly institutionally hosted data repositories. And really a long way down the list would be, we'll give it to a publisher for that. I'm not hearing any kind of much interest in that from the community, but maybe you're hearing something different.
I'm not hearing, well, I heard obviously I work for a not-for-profit, large society publisher, so we hear from our own authors that, we at Central IEEE should be in a position to help them solve this problem. I'm not perhaps the commercials are not hearing that story as often and as loudly as we are.
I
But-
mean, not live, but I mean, just in the UK, the two sort of largest society publishers are probably the IOP and the RSC.
Right.
My understanding is the IOP has sort of said, won't touch it with a barge pole, and the RSC have got money from EPSRC to run a chemical database service, and they are looking at building ChemSpider out to be a chemical data repository, sort of alongside this service. So you've got two really quite, I mean, literally opposite views there. Commercial publishers, my view is that they're all waiting for still thinking about this.
Perhaps, David.
Well, just to say, as a publisher, the thing that I work on, which is plantwise.org, we're actually doing data management for countries.
Happy's a bit different.
We're still a publisher. Okay, I know we are a bit different, and I'll take that as a compliment. But
You're not much like most of the
okay, but the point is, things start somewhere.
Yeah.
And we identified a need to manage plant, pest, and disease information that wasn't being managed particularly very well at all. And in fact, what we're doing right now is building up training and protocols and all the rest of it to help people in country do that governance work. And as it happens, effectively, although we haven't really called it that, one of the things we are doing is effectively building a repository of the facts of information in those countries. And some of that is public information, and in fact some of that will be incredibly private information that only certain people within country will be able to access and make use of. I mean, I think it's early days.
Right.
As publishers, we have some very good skills in curation and classification and managing things like thesauri and ontologies and all the things you need to make these kinds of data discoverable. So I think there's a lot we can bring to bear on this.
Well, I think Likewise is a fantastic example, by the way. Everyone should go and have a look at it.
So,
I think if you look at articles as basically data points and you break them down, you're really talking about databases, and we probably need to be there. It's sort of maybe 2 or 3 steps removed, or in the future, 2 or 3 steps in the future, but I think we need to be there, and we need to be doing things now to see how much is it really going to cost? Who are our users? What is the business model? If we're not there, we're going to be in trouble. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Ted Greener from the OECD. We publish 800 data sets, and we merge that with our books and with our trade literature into a single publishing platform. There is a business model behind it because data can be free, but it also needs a lot of support. The users of data are happy to pay for services to surround the data, so they can call and ask, how do I use this data, or which bit of data should I really be using? And there is a business opportunity, and that's how we fund the service that we provide. You're right, it costs money. I have 5 data editors on the team. So we have 2 editorial teams. We have a team that does the classic looking after the books and journals, and another team that looks after the data. Because you need specialist editors that look after that data. One of the biggest challenges that we have a citation tool for the data. So we've been trying for 3 years to get people to cite our data in the normal way, and people aren't doing it. Because the behavior isn't there, the users don't understand that you can now cite data as you would a journal or as you would a book, and they're simply not doing it. Which is for me a big frustration, because the tools are in place to allow this linking, and no one's using them. They're still citing data the old way, which is under the, they do a data extraction, they build a chart, and then they put source OECD underneath it, which is really useful when you have 800 data sets. It's the data set that you sourced it from. And it's frustrating because the toolkit's there, but no one's using it.
So that's a great story. And so what is the URL of your organization?
Well, if you go to OECDiLibrary.org.
OC
OECD.
ODCD
OE.
OECD. Thank you.
iLibrary.org, then that's our publishing there's a common search engine, so when you hunt for stuff, you will find data popping up in the search results as you would find a book chapter or a journal article or whatever.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, see, I don't really see any difference between a book chapter, and I agree that this is the way we need to start moving. It's going to be essential because that's the way research is going to start moving too.
Can I
Any
make
other-
a point about the business models too, just to kind of follow up on the first point, which is that in other industries, particularly pharma, the data has become just the raw material. Pharma companies are actually paying to have data archived openly so they can mine it, right? So there's this thing called the Sage Commons, which was started by a guy who used to work at Merck. They were tired of trying to figure out better disease models based on the little slice of clinical data that they had, clinical trial data. So they convinced all the other pharma companies to pool that data and create this giant database that they can all mine now. And they're competing with each other on that next layer, which is the better disease model, or software to reduce the dimensionality, or you name the problem. There are hundreds of problems with this big data stuff, right? So we really should be thinking about how to fund, I think, how to fund the curation and archiving of this data as a kind of social good or economic good for all of us, because we won't be able to build these added value services unless we all have access to this data as businesses. Does that make any sense? I know it's a different way to think about it, but that's where the money is. It's in those added value services.
Question about the academic credit. Mackenzie says it showed up in red on one of your slides. It's an important thing. And I've heard discussions in the past where data cite is all about being able to cite data. And I'm wondering how in a big data model, academic credit gets assigned to a particular researcher who maybe made some measurements that now get aggregated into a multi-terabyte data set or one of 800 data sets. Do you cite 50,000 authors who created one bit of that repository? Do you credit the repository, and how does that filter down to an individual scientist?
This is the conversation societies should be having. They've kind of solved the problem in physics. That's why there are hundreds of authors on papers related to the CERN Large Hadron Collider and things like that, because they're trying to give everyone credit. But it varies from discipline to discipline how you would handle that problem. So there isn't one answer, but it's exactly the conversation you should be having with your members.
And since provenance is so important in these big databases, the aggregated ones, it's a big question, big problem.
Yeah, I guess, so just in response to that, I've talked to some of our members, and they don't really get the concept of being cited for a measurement they made.
Right.
And it's the intellectual effort went into actually producing the manuscript that places that in context.
Yeah, and you see in places, I'm not remembering the names of the data centers right now, but we're seeing a diversification of the roles that people play. So there's author, but there's also the data manager and the ontologist. And what we're seeing is a lot more credit for different kinds of contributions. And we haven't caught up yet with what's going on, but there should be a way to credit somebody for those 3 measurements if it took them 5 years and was a significant effort. We just don't have.
The other one may have just taken a pressing of a button.
Well, and so we need a way to say that was a trivial contribution, just like we have now in the 3rd or the 300th of 800 authors.
We've always had that problem to some extent, just not on this magnitude, clearly.
Isn't that a problem that ORCID can solve?
The what?
ORCID.
You could.
Well, ORCID is, in fact, in astrophysics, I think it is. It's so important for authors, to be using ORCID for identification purposes. There's no doubt about it. Otherwise, you get no credit at all because your name may not match up, and just across all the papers that you're publishing, you may be publishing in 500 papers after only 2 years postdoc, because of your contribution. Any more questions? In back.
Right, I'll stand. I don't know if you can hear me from here. I have a question about the changing, the ways that new information types, things like, well, they're not really new, video and conference capture and sort of the virtual stuff that people are going to get from Google Glasses and things like that. Do you think, firstly, that the repositories that we have at the moment are sufficiently future-proofed to accommodate that type of content? Secondly, that the models we're looking to move towards in terms of the usage of data accommodate the changing landscape of that data?
So, yeah, so the question is if we have authors who begin to collect more types of more traditional data,
Yeah, or, well, I guess less
video,
traditional.
more video,
Yeah.
yeah, to an extent, the IEEE is dealing with that now. We have lots of we sponsor 1,300 conferences annually. We get a good amount of video related to all of them, and we stream all of that. We store all of that as part of an operation that we call IEEE TV. So I think we're ready to do that, but we had to build a different repository, a separate one from the papers database repository. I don't know that we've thought beyond the conference videos at this point. I'm curious to hear if others out in the audience have dealt with such a problem or seen the rise of the problem in their own organizations.
I think we're at the Wild West of the intersection between artificial intelligence and where the big data systems themselves are starting to classify things. And you see companies like Autonomy that actually work with the media companies like Warner Brothers and CNN, and they have facial recognition so that when you're looking for a Mel Gibson clip, you can type it in and find his age, based on the way his face looks. So the stuff's out there, and it's starting to and it will be more and more available. And I think then you're actually seeing the systems themselves classifying metadata, saying based on his face and his look, he's this age, or and then you can search on that. But it's a huge challenge because you have to somehow find structured data to put against that, rich media.
Yeah, I think that there are several efforts in this area so that everything can be tagged and the metadata put on through machine techniques for all video. And so we will be able to start categorizing the video and putting it into databases that make sense and are searchable. But right now, it's really, as Ian says, in its infancy. And I mean, that's the power of all this computational work that's being done now. And you see a lot more mathematicians going into this big data area, whereas before you didn't see mathematicians. They weren't needed for the kinds of algorithms that we were using, but now they really are desperately needed. So this is just going to, it's like a mushroom growing. Ian has a few slides about some of the data that's being collected beyond, the tractors and whatever. And if anybody wants to stay and see it, it's just amazing what's being collected. It's also scary.
Yeah.
As
I guess,
Mackenzie mentioned.
One of the examples when Mackenzie was talking that I forgot about, Target, the store, the retail store.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the
story.
kids.
The
yeah.
pregnant,
so,
yeah.
They started analyzing their customers, and they were looking at trends in people who bought pregnancy tests and then bought pills after that, and they figured, we can segment these people and, promote, and send certain promotions. Well, they ended up sending promotions to houses where there were 16-year-olds who were pregnant, and the parents didn't know yet. So targeted in advance of that, so it's like, where do you draw the line and what's too much? And it wasn't intentional, but there you go, so.
Sorry, Stuart Maxwell from Scholarly IQ. We do a lot of data mashing of usage and clickstream data and all that kind of thing with other metadata assets about content and accounts and things. But one of the things with big data is very powerful from doing that. Typically, people are using it for a a single piece of analysis. It's difficult to use it for managing a business and reporting. And it seems that hopefully there's going to become more of a sandbox type places where people are developing these kind of visualizations. But have the panel got views on best sources and approaches for helping people create visualizations and actually looking into the data that can now actually be crunched like this?
You referring to data that we're capturing through our websites, just as marketing data?
That's the kind of stuff we do.
Yeah, yeah.
But it could apply in any case. But how do you help users, researchers, other kind of systems, it's very sort of technical and diving into it.
Right,
And it's
right.
difficult to kind of build more of that sort of, if you're looking to manage a business or something from it, it's more difficult to find those kind of sort of software pieces to it.
Yeah, this is a whole new emerging industry, actually, and there are software programming language like processing for that reason. And you should go talk to the Microsoft research booth people downstairs, because companies like Microsoft are trying to build tools that normal people could use to visualize data. They're not the only ones, but if you want to kind of see what the state of the art is, they're investing a ton in that right now.
A lot of startups doing that too.
Yeah.
I think that the challenge is that's the rub. It's if you have someone who can go in there and look at the data and actually make a decision with it, that's probably not the same person who's doing the algorithm and the analysis. So it's like, can the systems be smart enough to say, here's the business insight behind the data crunching to give them the context? That's why all these BI tools really don't get you that far unless you have people who have both sides of the table. So.
Exactly. So you as a publisher, if you've got this information behind you, editorially speaking, where should we be going? What should we be looking at? What should we be advising funding bodies about? And if you've got those teams, maybe at OECD or somewhere, you can be helping to lead that conversation because your action is that repository of it. But you need to be able to create something that communicates that and shows those.
To monetize it somehow. Yeah.
Yeah, as we said in the beginning, and I think Jerry said it later, there's two kinds of data that we're looking at. One is all the research data that we as publishers should be looking at, but it's also refining our own business. We are probably doing a lot of things wrong. We're very far now from when the librarian used to check whether there was dust on the journal to see if it has been used. And that's not so long ago when that was going on. And now we really have to think hard about where we're going, even in our existing products.
So when you talk about these big data sets, collecting the data, a huge problem, querying data is a huge problem, but to my mind, maintaining the data long-term, curating it, making sure that it's verified as being good data and it's the same data you stored last year and hasn't been changed, that's really kind of the intractable problem, especially when people are making money off of it. Business model is based around their data, and somebody in the company screws the data up, and they don't have any imperative to really let the world know that. Who watches the Watchmen at private companies that are based around huge data sets?
Well, you're right. That's a great question and a great problem that we need to wrestle with. And perhaps when I think of the word curation, right? Curation means picking out what you choose to steward. I think the picking out of that, and I think that we'll be in a world where I don't think, unfortunately, we'll be able to steward every data set that comes along, and I think that we'll need to pick and choose and be constrained always by the money that we have to preserve that.
Just on the issue of curation, one of the problems that I have is the teams that make our data sets. When they feel that they finished the data set, or they're no longer going to keep data on that data set, they want us to delete that data set. So that it's no longer available. And especially if they have a new data set that replaces the old data set. And this is very interesting because, of course, I say no. Because, you can't do that. And they say, well, why not? And I say, well, old books. Do we go to libraries and say, well, the old books aren't burn them? Oh, no, they're that bad. Some reasons bad in print, but online it's fine to read fast. But and this is really interesting because I have control of the data set so that the author can't take the data away. But in a lot of places, it's the author that controls it. And this is, for me, is really dangerous because they can remove the content. And certainly in the data we collect, they often revise the data back in time. And we have a rule that if they revise it beyond a certain amount, we actually make a copy of the data set so that the old version is still there, and then there's the revised version. And then we describe that with the metadata so that everyone knows where they are. And again, the authors hate this because they have to then explain what they revised. And it's more work than.
does that mean that you get rid of it or not? I mean,
Well, no,
you
no,
know,
that's an
no.
interesting question.
Yeah, because it may not have value today, but maybe it has value in.
And what happens when the governments decide that the OECD shouldn't exist anymore?
The data gets thrown away every day, and rightly so. I mean, CERN wouldn't operate without daily throwing away most of the data.
Yes, right.
But it's sensitive. So, you know, the real world is data has a life cycle, and that includes debt.
The old brick and mortar libraries have a, have a task, and that's every year they weed, right? And the old books get disposed of, and new books, and make room for the new books to come in. So maybe there'll be some sort of, weeding that goes on. And, and from another angle, not every painting makes it into the museums.
Yeah. There'll be a
Right.
secondary market in data
Right.
sets.
So we've just invented another business today.
Okay, I think that wraps it up. If anybody wants to see Ian's examples, we'll be here a couple more minutes. And thank you very much.